For 200,000 ringgit, there are actually a bunch of EVs that you can buy, many of them offering differing levels of performance, but most of them offering in excess of 300 kilometers of range. Some of them, in fact, even offer in excess of 400. But Mazda says you don't need that. Instead, for your 200-odd thousand ringgit, you only need 200 kilometers of range and significantly less punch than you'd get from anything else. And that's why we have this, the Mazda MX-30, because we're here to figure out if Mazda's claims that this is the ultimate urban EV is true. And before we get into our full review, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Ladies and gentlemen, the MX-30. Now, the MX-30 is actually Mazda's first full EV, and it rides on the same platform as the CX-30. As a result, however, it does mean that it's got this beautiful long bonnet beneath which sits no usable space. However, because this is a modern Mazda, it has very modern Mazda design features, such as full LED headlights with adaptive front lighting system. You even have these LED positioning lights down there which double up as LED indicators, replete with the heartbeat indicator, which Mazda is quite proud about. And despite this being a full EV, there is still the inclusion of the Mazda grille here, which is largely just for design, although there are some openings to allow some air in for cooling. And overall, it looks like a very familiar sight. It's certainly not bold, but it's pretty to me. But the side of the MX-30, like the complex surfacing of many other Mazda models, is, to me, where it looks its best. Because although it doesn't quite have the surface play that you get from, say, the Mazda 3 hatch, or even the CX-30 for that matter, it does have a very unique profile. And because of the way the roofline is designed, it looks very coupe-like almost, despite this car having 4 doors, sort of, we'll get to that in a second, and actually a raised roofline. It's all just visual trickery. Now, this car runs on 18-inch alloy wheels, and they are done up in this sort of darker steel grey color, which even against the grey color of this car looks really good. Although personally, I prefer this car in the Soul Red signature hue. Now, what you see back here, this massive thing underneath this satin Mazda badge, which I quite like, is the charge port. Now, although it is very large, it is just a standard charge port with your AC and DC connectors here. It's worth noting this car charges up to 50 kilowatts DC, and I think it's 7.4 kilowatts AC. If I'm wrong, you will see some text at the bottom of your screen. Now, before I move to the back, I actually want to talk about one of my favorite design features on the side of this car, and that are the doors. The front doors open like regular doors. They are of a regular size, as you would expect, although admittedly they do open to a very wide aperture, wouldn't you say? Now, the funny thing is about the rear doors is you don't see a door handle because it's not here, it's here. And it opens like this. Now, this is what Mazda calls the freedom doors. This is what we first saw on the RX-8, and it's to allow better ingress and egress into the rear of the car. That certainly does improve over your usual coupe, I'll admit that much. But to me, the ingress and egress is secondary because I don't really put people in the back. What matters more to me is the lack of a B-pillar, because the fact that there is no B-pillar means that the top and bottom of this car is so strong that it doesn't need a strengthening pillar in the middle. Of course, you will have to close the rear door first before closing the front door, because that's just how it works. And at the rear of the car, I think is, again, another area I quite like. So I'm sure you would have seen the body cladding that's been very prominently displayed all the way around the car, because it's ultimately a crossover Mazda, and so they want you to see the utilitarianness of it, and it does extend all the way around the back bumper, very much like the CX-30. But unlike the CX-30, however, the MX-30 doesn't quite offer as much space in the back. So for starters, the tailgate is manual, not really that big of a deal because the tailgate itself is not very heavy anyway. And inside you will see there is a decent amount of space. It is worth noting, however, that there is absolutely no space underneath the floor. And as a result, things like the emergency kit, the tire compressor kit, as well as your emergency granny charger all have to live in here. However, the MX-30 is sold as standard with a 3-pin granny charger should you need to charge it overnight via a household socket, but it also comes as standard with a Type 2 to Type 2 cable, as you can see here, replete with a nice bag courtesy of Mazda's suppliers. Now, of course, if you're smart about your planning, you don't need to carry all this crap with you all the time, so of course the boot space is a little bit more usable. But most importantly, if you need more space, the rear seats do fold 60/40 and they sit pretty flat. Now, enough about the exterior and the practicality, we have to move inside where I assure you things get a lot better. Now, the interior of the MX-30, like I said, is much better than the exterior in my opinion because it's a very Mazda interior. What I mean by that is everything is incredibly well built and it feels really high quality. The tactile sensations in here are fantastic, including this electronic gear lever, which is really satisfying to use. Now, because it's a Mazda, obviously you get the MZD Connect system up ahead of you with its very usable interface, replete with wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And as far as I'm concerned, this is, again, one of the best infotainment systems currently available in the mass market, done better only by Kia and Hyundai. And in front of me, I have 2 dials, one for my charge and power, and one more for my battery temperature and battery charge level. And they flank a digital screen in the middle, which tells me all sorts of things like my ADAS, my range, my regen, my battery in percentage, as well as other things like my radar, cruise control, and so on. And if I don't have enough information here, or I don't want to look at it here, I still get a full color information display up ahead of me via a heads-up unit, which I think is absolutely fantastic. There are a few things in here that are unique to the MX-30, or rather are new to Mazda and being introduced to the MX-30. One of them is this touchscreen system for the HVAC control. So this is what allows me to adjust my temperature and my fan speed, as well as various other settings for the HVAC system. This is new for Mazda because normally they use knobs and switches. And as far as I'm concerned, while the touchscreen is very nice, the graphics are fantastic, much like the MZD Connect system and the screen in front of me and the heads-up display. I do appreciate the fact that a lot of the buttons here, like the adjustment for the fan speed and the temperature, can be done either from the screen or you can do so via physical buttons. This gives me my choice. So if I want to use the screen, I can. If my passenger wants to use the screen, they can. And if I just want to use the buttons, I can do that too, which I think is great. In terms of buttons, of course, you get the steering wheel, which is a typical Mazda item with all of the lovely buttons, very easy to see, very easy to get used to. And as far as I'm concerned, I really like it. The other thing that's unique to this car, aside from that, is this floating center console. This is new for Mazda, and it gives you a lot more space under here for you to put more stuff, like phones, for example, which is very useful given the fact the USB port for the infotainment system comes out from under there. So you can stick your phone in here, it won't rattle and it won't slide about, which I think is quite fantastic. Now, as you may have caught a little bit, some of these materials look a little bit odd, and the reason for that is because they are. Mazda has decided to use cork for various panels in here, like this center console here, and even in the cup holder covers up here should you want to extend the space. And you might think that that's a little weird, and I agree, because cork is certainly not a material that you normally find in a car. But this is actually Mazda talking about its history, because believe it or not, Mazda as a company began making cork. And so they've integrated that into this car to remind you of its heritage. Kind of nice, forward-thinking car and a nod to history. In terms of materials, you do get this sort of vegan leather, if I recall correctly, done up in this nice saddle brown. And in the middle, you get this lovely high-quality upholstery, which is fabric, with a little bit of contrast stitching in the middle, which I think looks incredibly high quality and incredibly indulgent. Now, unfortunately, however, only my seat is powered with lumbar support and 2-stage memory. Unfortunately, this passenger seat is manual. I would have preferred if this was electric as well, because we have the high-spec MX-30, and so, you know, I want some nicer things. At least I do get the adaptive front lighting system that I mentioned earlier and the Bose audio system, which is Now, in terms of rear space, which is very important in a car like this because Mazda is targeting young urban families with this car, primarily as a second vehicle, admittedly. And in terms of rear accoutrements, well, as you can see, space back here is actually pretty good. And honestly, coming back into these seats is very easy via these freedom doors. The lack of a B-pillar makes life a lot easier. And for the passenger on this side to get in and out, there are actually buttons here that control the front seats to allow even more space should you want it. That said, however, being back here, the windows are rather small, which means it's a little bit dark, and the most irritating thing, however, is the fact that this seat is set very low, which means, as you can see, my under thighs are not getting that much support, and even if I try to tuck the tips of my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, which is set up for my driving position, as you can see, there isn't that much under thigh support. Furthermore, there are very few sort of accoutrements back here, with only a couple of cup holders and your ISOFIX mounts. Naturally, there are no USB ports and there are no aircon vents, unfortunately, which I think does limit things slightly. However, Burmaz does sell the MX-30 as standard with tint, which is very good, and so the aircon does do a pretty good job at cooling the cabin. Now, if you're wondering where this car justifies its price, Mazda says that in addition to the quality of its interior, the bold design of its exterior, it also comes in the way that it drives, because clearly it's not in the motor or the battery. So let's figure out what that's like. Now, when you look at the 200,000 ringgit-ish EV segment, you have quite a number of competitors now. You've got the GWM Aura Good Cat, which you can get all the way up in its flagship guise with a claimed range of about 500 kilometers, although realistically it's more like 4. You could also get the BYD Atto 3, which also has a claimed range of between 4 to 500 kilometers, although realistically you're looking at about 420. And then you have Hyundai's Kona EV, which you can get also in its flagship guise, which offers about 420 to 450 kilometers on a single charge. What's worth noting is the fact that the Kona is also significantly more powerful than the Mazda MX-30, which means if you're into performance, you might be more interested in something like that. But what all of these cars have as an advantage over the MX-30 is range, because this car's relatively small battery means that it only has about 200 kilometers of range on a full charge, which I can verify. I've driven this car for a couple of days and it will do about 200 kilometers based on whatever the range estimates are, and so it is quite accurate in that regard. And the thing about an urban EV is that if you ask Mazda, they say 200 kilometers is enough. The battery pack that's fitted to this car is enough, because ultimately the majority of users do not travel that far and therefore they don't need a big battery. And the downside of having a big battery, therefore extra range, is that it will also affect weight, because a bigger battery makes the car significantly heavier, which makes it less efficient and also less fun to drive. And also, they argue, slightly less safe because of inertia. But I'll choose to believe that you can just fit better brakes to a car. Now, put all of that together, and what happens is you have what is ultimately a very good city car, because no doubt the MX-30 is the most polished among these sort of compact crossover type vehicles. In terms of ride comfort, it feels very much like a Mazda, so it's not too soft, but it maintains its body control really, really well, and it's never uncomfortable. So whenever you hit a pothole, it takes out the very worst edges of the interruption and removes it from the cabin as much as possible. And so this makes it a very pleasurable place to be, especially when you're in town. And then there's the noise insulation, because we've been very lucky to have driven cars like the Porsche Taycan, the BMW iX, etc. And as a result, we're becoming very familiar with what the silence of an electric vehicle is like. However, we've also driven the Hyundai Kona EV, we've also driven the BYD Atto 3, and as a result, we also know that in affordable vehicles, normally it's sound insulation that tends to be the most obvious detriment. But in this, even though it's only a 200,000 ringgit vehicle, it is quieter, I'd argue, than a BMW iX, which is a car that is twice its price and also has twice the range. But As a result, it means that driving around in town is truly pleasant. There are no interruptions to the cabin. It doesn't matter what's happening outside. It doesn't matter if there is a bike or a truck or whatever. You are beautifully insulated from the world around you. And as a result, as an urban car, that sense of isolation means that you do tend to be less stressed when you're stuck in traffic, because it means that you don't really interact with the world around you. You just sort of sit and allow the car to do the majority of the work. Now, speaking of that, I'm in the MX-30 High, which means that I get the Bose audio system, the nicer interior, and I do get the full level 2 semi-autonomy suite. And Mazda's ADAS systems, which I've only sampled in the CX-8 and CX-9 because they're not really that widely available, I think the CX-30 has it as well, is among the best. I feel that the Korean marques like Kia and Hyundai do it slightly better, but compared to everyone else, like from Toyota and Honda, the ADAS systems in these cars are the best judged and they are the best managed. And as a result, you can trust the vehicle. So when you're stuck in traffic, for example, you can allow the car to simply do all of the accelerating and braking for you because you know that the car will do it. And of course, you still have to pay attention, keep both hands on the wheels at all times. But of course, it does mean a great reduction in terms of input. And like I said, that makes driving less stressful. Now, that noise you're hearing is the sound of the blind spot monitor, which admittedly in this car is slightly overzealous because it does look very, very far away. But overall, the safety systems in this car are very comprehensive. Now, in terms of overall practicality, I've already demonstrated to you what the space is like in the back, but the more I think about it, I can see kind of where Mazda is going with this, because as a second vehicle or as a city runabout type thing for, say, a stay-at-home parent, or indeed if it's just a smaller car for you to drive to and from work while you have a bigger family car at home, the MX-30 makes a lot of sense, because 200 kilometers range is enough if you have a charger at home, and only if you have a charger at home, because that's adequate range. We don't do more than 200 kilometers a day normally. The average Malaysian commute is about 35-ish kilometers, thereabouts. And so there's definitely more than enough battery range in here for you to go through a couple of days, in fact, without charging. Although Burmaz, and indeed Mazda, believes that the best way to use your MX-30 is to charge it every day. So the ideal is that you go home, you plug it in, and you wake up the next morning to find a full charge. But not everybody has chargers at home, especially those of us who live in KL. Urbanites like us don't have access to chargers at home, not even a 3-pin plug. Although that said, Burmaz does rather generously sell this car with a wall box, although it's a wall box that plugs into a 3-pin plug, and they also sell you a Type 2 cable, which means that most of your AC charging needs are met straight out of the box. So, to me, it seems like they've understood what it takes to make a comprehensively equipped urban electric vehicle. But it's just a shame because this car is so comfortable and so refined, and I love the way it looks and I love the way it drives, and I think that any of you who appreciate a well-built, high-quality machine would appreciate this, just like most of Mazda's customers tend to. But the problem I have with recommending this is, again, the range is severely limited. Now, I'm of the belief that we are today in 2023 able to live with an electric vehicle full time, provided it has adequate range. If you are a single car household and you have something like a Kona EV Max, for example, or a BYD Atto 3, you could just have the one electric car because 450 kilometers of range is adequate. But in a car like this, the MX-30 was either designed to be a second car, although the marketing material will never admit it, or Mazda really doesn't understand what EVs are about, because I can't recommend this in good faith. If you are a 2-car household and you want a second sort of urban runabout, and you're looking for a compact crossover that is fun to drive, great to look at, comprehensively equipped, and feels plush and upmarket, then yes, the MX-30 is a fantastic proposition. But if you're looking to break into the world of electric motoring and you want your primary or perhaps even your sole vehicle to be electric, then unfortunately this is not it. For this kind of money, I'd rather recommend the Hyundai Kona EV Max or the BYD Atto 3, because both of these cars are about as well equipped as this, although they're not nearly as pretty to look at, and of course they don't have the fancy suicide doors. But that said, you can also put more people in the back because they were designed as 4-door vehicles to begin with. However, again, if you want a stylish urban runabout vehicle, a car to complement whatever it is you currently have, like a Kia Carnival, for example, then the Mazda MX-30 is a fantastic machine. Truly, if I had something like a, I don't know, some sort of other family car, bigger vehicle with internal combustion engine, and I wanted a second car to just do daily urban duties, I would happily have an MX-30, because truly, I can't quite get this across on camera, but truly this car is built so incredibly well. It's so quiet and plush and well appointed that it feels like a car that is much more expensive than you'd expect. I'd recommend this over a Mini Electric too, which also is about the same price range with about the same battery range, because I feel like this is not only a more practical vehicle, especially with the 2 extra rear doors, but also I feel like this is a better equipped vehicle compared to the Mini E. So what do you think about the Mazda MX-30? At least what are the less obvious things that you think about the Mazda MX-30? Let me know in the comment section below. And this is our first video that we're producing since hitting 10,000 subscribers. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank each and every one of you for your continuous support. Truly, we wouldn't be here without you. And we certainly look forward to being here for a long time to come. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care, stay safe, jangan bodoh.